The Hospitable Leader. That's our title today. And no, we're not talking about hotels or restaurants. We're talking about you as a leader, being a hospitable leader. Are you ready? Let's go. Ready? Let's go. Ready?
Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We are here each week to talk about leadership, teamwork, organizational culture, and human potential with experts from every walk of life. Your host is Kevin Eikenberry, a best-selling author and leadership thought leader for 25 years. This episode is sponsored by Kevin's book, The Long Distance Leader: Rules for Remarkable Remote Leadership. Order your copy today at remarkablepodcast.com/book. And now, here's your host, Kevin.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Our guest today is Terry Smith. He has served as the lead pastor of the Life Christian Church for 27 years. TLCC is a non-denominational faith community in West Orange, New Jersey, serving the New York City metro area. He's the co-founder of movement.org, formerly the New York City Leadership Center, and has previously served as an instructor in its Leadership Fellows program. He is passionate about challenging, developing, and encouraging leaders, whether they know they are leaders or not. I love that, Terry. He holds both a Bachelor's of Science degrees in organizational management and a Master of Science in organizational leadership. He's also the author of a brand new book, not his first, but a brand new book, The Hospitable Leader: Create Environments Where People and Dreams Flourish. We're going to talk about the book, but first of all, welcome, Terry. Glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I'm thrilled to be here. I noticed in reading about you that you've had a lot of really great authors, and I'm honored to be included in what you're doing.
Hey, man, I'm excited to have you here. And if anyone happens to be watching, you see all these little notes in my book, which tells you that I like the book, and I did a lot, and I already told you that before. In fact, everybody, I really, really liked Terry until he told me before I hit record that he used to follow IU basketball. So we have at least one thing to disagree on. But beyond that, and as we're recording this, it's just recently happened, the Purdue IU game, and we won't go into that, Terry, since we beat you by 15. Okay. Anyway, so Terry, tell us about your leadership journey. We said a little bit in the bio, but just tell us a little bit about sort of your path that's got you up to here and sort of how you got where you're at.
Yeah. So I've been serving the Life Christian Church in West Orange, New Jersey, and now Paramus, since we are a multi-site church here in a suburb of New York City for 27 years. So most of my adult ministry has been involved here, most of my leadership experience. Prior to that, I led a crusade ministry, and I just have a real passion for leadership in general and for leaders.
Well, I can tell you, everybody, having read the book, that Terry comes through very clearly right from the start. You and I have the shared passion for leadership. The book is called The Hospitable Leader. And I know that when I get all these books from people that want for me to have them on the podcast. And when I first saw it, I thought, oh, this is a restaurateur that wrote this book, because that sort of seemed like what that was going to be. And it didn't have to go very far to figure out that wasn't the case. So tell us a little bit give us an overview of the book. I know it has 5 sections. Talk a little bit about sort of the premise and the overview of the book.
You know, let me just say, Kevin, I don't feel like I answered your first question well. I think it might be important for your listeners to know that when my wife and I came here 27 years ago, there was a very small group of people, a handful of people, that the church has grown exponentially over the years, that we are very well known for our diversity. Some people have called us one of the most diverse churches in the world, and we're also known for attracting a lot of, for lack of a better term, but for the sake of your listeners' understanding, high capacity leaders. And so my leadership journey hasn't just been shepherding a flock, which is incredibly important to me. It's been growing a thing.
Yep. And
it's been developing leaders and building an organization, and hence my interest in organizational leadership. So anyway, I probably should give your listeners a reason to at least listen to what I have to say a little bit.
Yeah, and I guess I jumped past that because I knew those things. I'd done my homework. It wasn't in the bio, so I appreciate you sort of backtracking. So now
The book.
The book, 5 sections. Is a different sort of book. I would say to everybody that one of the things I love about it is that some of the language that you choose and sort of the metaphor of the hospitable leader. So talk about the 5 sections real quick.
Yeah. So first of all, the book's a marriage of hospitality and leadership. And perhaps I should say it's the offspring of the marriage of hospitality and leadership. And the technical definition of a hospitable leader is that a hospitable leader creates environments of welcome where moral leadership can more effectively influence an ever-expanding diversity of people. So what I'm interested in helping people do is to create an environment where they can lead more effectively, whatever their moral leadership style is. And the 5 welcomes of the book, which is where I unpack different big ideas that I think are really important to effective leadership. The first welcome is called home. And that's where I talk about how that a hospitable leader creates environments that feel like home, because home is where people's hearts are warmed. And when people's hearts are warm, it's much easier to lead them to good and beautiful things. The second welcome is called strangers. And this is where I talk at great length how that the practice of hospitality, which involves a lot of things. I'm not talking about, I'm not talking about Martha Stewart here.
Thank you, because neither of us are qualified.
Okay, I'm talking about creating an environment of welcome. The practice of hospitality welcomes in a diversity of people. And when I talk about strangers, I'm talking about people who are strange to us and to whom we are strange. And I talk about the potential inherent in welcoming people to the table who are not like us, and how we multiply our influence when we do that. The third welcome is called dreams. That's where I talk about how that a hospitable leader is hospitable to people's dreams. A lot of leaders lead in a way that's really dream killing. It's all about the leader's dream. But a hospitable leader gets up every day to help the dreams of their followers come true. And when they do, they find out that people fall all over themselves to help the leader's dreams come true. The fourth welcome is called communication. And it's just about hospitable communication. How do we speak truth in a way? And every business, every family, certainly every church necessitates the speaking of truth, because people don't grow unless you speak truth. How do you speak the truth in a way where people will actually receive it? And I talk about how that you have to speak the truth wrapped in grace. And then finally, the fifth welcome is called feast. And that's where I talk about, I use this metaphor in the book that one of the things that Jesus said, and Jesus is the ultimate hospitable leader, whether one believes in his truth claims or not, you can't deny the effectiveness of his leadership. Jesus described his leadership domain in one way as a feast that a father threw for his son. And I challenge leaders to think about, what would it feel like for your leadership domain to feel like a feast that you've thrown for your followers? And in the fifth welcome, I dig into that a little bit more, and I say, if you're going to throw a feast, you have to live a feast. And I talk about how important it is for us to live in a way where we cultivate hope and happiness in our own lives so we can share it with others.
So that's a great overview of the book. And so, as I said earlier, I got all these notes in here. And so I'm going to ask a couple of specific questions about a couple of things that you said there. But I also just have some random things. At least they will seem random perhaps to you.
Great.
Because there's
great.
Some of the things that stuck out to me that I really liked. So it's not a test, Terry, but I do have a few things. So one of them, you talk about a term, and I'm a lover of words, and I think that you are as well. Talk about a term I did not know, but I love the idea of, and it's the term Philoxenia.
Yeah.
So let's talk. Can you talk about that and why it's so important? Would you please?
I sure can. So I talk about Philoxenia in the section called strangers. And so there's this passage in the New Testament letter to the Hebrews where the writer says, Hebrews 13:1, keep on loving each other as brothers and sisters. And the Greek word that's used there is Philadelphia, which of course means brotherly love. So he says, keep on loving your brothers. Well, that can actually be challenging enough to do, but that's a lot easier than what he then moves on to in Hebrews 13:2, where he says, and don't forget to be hospitable to strangers, because by so doing, you may find yourself entertaining angels unaware. And that word, hospitable to strangers, or in some translations, to entertain strangers, comes from the Greek word Philoxenia. And Philoxenia means literally to love a stranger, or to love loving a stranger. So the writer of the Hebrews says, Hebrews 13:1, practice Philadelphia, but then he essentially says, but don't stay there, because you need to move from Philadelphia to Philoxenia. You need to love your brothers and sisters, but that's not all. Now that you've created this place called home, you have to move to this place where you love people who are not like you. And the beauty of that is we learn that oftentimes when we love people who aren't like us, they become angels, which is a messenger from God. And many times, me as a white guy from Indiana, as are you at least presently, although you have hair and I have none.
I'm living right. I'm just saying. It's gray though. So anyway.
Leading a congregation that's full of people who aren't like me has expanded my life and expanded my influence, because I've learned to welcome strangers.
Well, I think that's where I wanted you to land. I mean,
thank God I finally landed, huh?
No, it's just the idea that for us as leaders, wherever we're leading, right, is that there's a payoff for that very difficult thing to try to do, and that payoff benefits everybody, as most leadership principles that we would both espouse are going to benefit multiple. Everyone. It's 3D, right? We're going to win. The team's going to win. The world's going to win. And I think that
well said.
I think that's was such a striking thing. If there's one thing in this book that I will remember forever, that'll probably be it. Read those passages, never connected it in the way that you just did for us, right there. So you also write something, I don't remember where, it's in the same area. You write this idea that says it's simply easier to influence people who have been welcomed to the table. And we as leaders are influencers if we're going to be successful in any way, if people are choosing to follow us. So say more about that. You've started to unpack the metaphor in general, but say more about that idea of, hey, let's just be practical. If we are more welcoming, we will be more influential. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I part of this is coming out of the pain that I feel and that so many of us feel about this polarization in our culture. And it shows up in so many ways. And I think people make a mistake by only speaking to their base, only speaking to their brothers and sisters. Because if we're leaders, then as you said, leadership is essentially influence, and you can't influence people who you have not welcomed. And in so many times, and this is true in my view, both sides of the political aisle. This is true in so much of the racial discussion in our country. This is true in arguments that, sadly enough, one Christian denomination has with another. So often we speak in ways that are so unwelcoming that no one could ever listen to our point of view. And so, we run away the very people that we're trying to change their minds, but we can't change their minds until we warm their hearts.
When I'm working with leaders, sometimes I'll make the comment, and again, it doesn't matter which channel you turn on, but you get the split screen. It's not split the way you might be seeing us. It's split the other way. And you got two people with different perspectives yelling at each other, and to expect that the chasm is going to get reduced, to expect that any influence is going to happen there is craziness. It's as crazy as the conversation itself, right?
Yeah. So if you're trying to build your customer base, I mean, so I was privileged to be interviewed recently by one of the members of the executive team at Chick-fil-A, and they practice hospitality so well. Imagine if the way they were trying to get business from Wendy's was saying, "Hey, if you eat at Wendy's, you're stupid. You're just stupid." But that seems to be the way so many people are trying to exercise persuasion in today's world. So I just find it tragic. I posted a picture on Instagram yesterday to answer a question you didn't ask. I know interviewers love that. I'm sorry. I posted an interview on Instagram yesterday and pardon me, I don't talk much about politics, but I think I can talk about it in a positive way here, of Senator Cory Booker, my U.S. Senator here in New Jersey, who I have a relationship with. I disagree with him about a lot of things, maybe most everything, but I have a relationship with for many years, hugging Senator Charles Grassley, the conservative senator from Iowa. They had just come together around prison reform. And regardless what anyone thinks about that particular issue, the picture of these two men on opposite ends of the political spectrum hugging was so relieving. And then I posted a picture of Senator Booker standing and holding my book, The Hospitable Leader. I had a conversation with him just a couple of weeks ago about this concept, and frankly challenged him a little bit about his approach to a particular issue that he was debating on the national stage right then, and saying, "Hey, Cory, the people you want to influence are not going to listen to you if you make all of us so upset that we can't get past the first few words." So I see in hospitable leadership the potential for people to come to at least sit at the table and have a conversation together. It doesn't mean that we're going to necessarily agree with each other, but maybe at least we can get something good done.
Well, and if we're trying to coalesce a group as a leader, that's critical, right? So that whole idea, now we're moving into the section of the book about communication, and you made this comment. Well, first of all, let's back up. Everyone listening or watching would agree that, communication is about message sent and message received. But you said something really interesting that struck me, and it says, if we're going to connect with an audience, we must first be a good audience, right? Something along those lines. Like, before we can connect with the audience, we must be willing to be a good audience first. So you're getting at that idea now in this example. Can you say more about that? Because I've talked about this idea a lot for a long time and never said it quite that way. Can you expound on that a little bit more?
Sure. So when I talk about communication, let's say particularly in this case, public speaking.
Sure.
And obviously communication is about a lot more things than that. But when I talk about public speaking, I usually talk about three things. None of this is rocket science, but I frame it, I think, a little differently than is commonly seen. I talk about how, first of all, communication has its root in the word common, and communication begins with finding things in common. And I, especially as it concerns persuasive communication. Yep. All of us know that if you can begin by finding something in common with whoever it is you're trying to influence through your communication, this is a good thing. Secondly, key to that is listening. And that's where I think I talk about what you just mentioned, which is, in order to reach an audience, you first have to be a good audience. This goes back to Covey saying, to be understood, we must first seek to understand, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's so important to listen to whoever it is we intend to speak to, preferably before we speak, while we're speaking, and after we speak. So we have a sense of who they are before we try to talk to them. And then while we're talking to them, we're watching, paying attention, body language, and if it's a proper context, whatever it is they happen to be actually saying back to us. And then we're getting feedback after it's all over to see if what we said actually resonated. But I think we have to be a good audience. And then thirdly, for effective communication, obviously we have to speak, but we have to learn to speak hospitably. I think there's a tremendous need, a hunger in our culture. And this is true of people leading businesses, and in every other place. There's a tremendous need for people to say what they have to say in a way where people can actually receive it.
Yeah, and I want to just back up for everyone as you were listening. Notice that Terry talked about three things, and the last one he talked about was actually speaking, right? And I was reflecting on you and I's conversation. We had some technical challenges before we got to this point, and at one point, the technology was allowing me to hear you perfectly. You could see me, but you couldn't hear me. And yet, so I had really the opportunity to start to get to know a little bit more about you, your relationship with your assistant, just by observing all that. I think it allowed me to be more successful with you. And always before I start these conversations, before I hit record, we find some things in common, even if what we found in common were things we disagree on, like a particular basketball school. But but seriously, all of that is important to your point, right? Finding the commonality, then doing the listening and listening with our eyes and not just with our ears. And then what's our message, as opposed to starting with our messages, which is where most people want to start. So one of I guess I have two really other big things I want to talk about. You did unpack this pretty well in the description of the book when you said we need to be welcoming to strangers. And that's not a phrase or a word that probably most people are thinking about in a leadership book. It's your way to get at diversity, I think, in a way, at least in part. And you did talk about that a little bit. What else would you want to say to us listening today about the value of that, or what it means for us to welcome strangers around us?
So I mentioned a minute ago that the church I lead is incredibly diverse, but it's incredibly diverse in all kinds of ways. I'm not just talking about race. It's race, ethnicity, nation of origin, politics, a lot of people with doctorates, still a number of people trying to climb the ladder and maybe get their GED even. Just a lot of different kinds of people, Baptists, Pentecostals, Catholics, Jewish people who like to come and hear the message, lots of people. And so this is the context here in the shadow of New York City in which I have had to learn how to, frankly, love people who aren't like me. And what I've learned when I love people who aren't like me is that often those people become incredibly important voices in my life and allow me to expand my influence. Now, here's an illustration, if I may, of how Jesus did this. Jesus welcomed women to his leadership team in a way that women had never, ever been welcomed before by any recognized leader. And he did that, I think, first of all, because it was the right thing to do. But secondly, he did that, in my perspective, because it was effective. When he welcomed women to his leadership table, which though his 12 disciples were all men, you look at who actually was working with him, there were a lot of very significant women who were on his team, and this was true of the early New Testament church. When he did that, he doubled his labor force. He had twice as many people, more than twice the number of people who now were spreading his message. And this is the story of, by the way, of part of the rapid growth of early Christianity, is that people were welcomed who'd never been welcomed before. The first Christians were exclusively Jewish. Well, they welcomed Gentiles, therefore multiplying their influence. They welcomed slaves. It's amazing how often slaves, which is a little bit different in the first century, well, radically different in the first century than as we think of race-based slavery in
Right.
recent times. But they welcomed slaves who were essentially a type of indentured servants into their fellowship. And again, they multiplied. They multiplied their influence. This is part of what happens when we welcome strangers. We do it because it's the right thing to do, but also as leaders, if we're trying to influence people in a multiplicative way, then why wouldn't we want to welcome as many people to the table as possible?
Well, and I think that's the thing that people don't think about. They think about it, well, it's the right thing to do, or I really oughta, or I really should wanna, as opposed to saying, hey, this is not only all of those things are true, and yet there's this other whole piece to it that says, hey, I'm going to grow, the team's going to grow, our influence is going to grow, etc. So I think it gives us a whole other way, another lens, if you will, to look at that. I've got one more thing that I want to talk about. You and I have, and many, probably most everyone who is listening to us, have this in common as a leader, that we have a vision of where we're trying to go, a desired future that we're leading towards, and yet there's this paradox of our vision versus the dreams and vision of our team. And I think you do a really good job in the book of talking about that balance. And you said a little bit about it earlier, but would you say a little bit more about that? And what advice would you give to those of us on this, listening to you, about how we balance our vision and the dreams and vision of our teams?
I offer a definition of moral leadership in the Hospitable Leader. I say that moral leadership is to inspire, influence, and empower others to self-actualization and the accomplishment of mission. Now, I won't try to deal with all of that because most of your listeners are going to understand the basic concepts in that definition very well. We moral leaders inspire people. Moral leaders influence people, which means we actually affect change. Moral leaders empower people, which means that we share power with people. But then I say that we do that for self-actualization and the accomplishment of mission. Meaning, I think that oftentimes a leader thinks of his or her leadership activity in terms of what the leader's dreams are. But I think that when we also think about the self-actualization of our followers, meaning, of course, that we want them to become everything they actually have the potential to become. We want them to be fully actualized. When we inspire, influence, and empower others to self-actualization, then we can also focus on the accomplishment of mission. So to me, that's the full orbed package. I'm getting up every day to help my leaders succeed in their lives, or my followers, I should say, many of whom are leaders.
Right.
But I've learned that when I do that, that my mission is actually accomplished much easier and more rapidly than if I had just gotten up and asked those folks to focus on the mission. I focus on them. And I also unabashedly try to connect what they're doing in their lives to a cause greater than themselves.
Right.
And therefore, there's this beautiful thing where, as a result of my leadership, they're growing, they're getting bigger, they're becoming more successful. And then they bring that back to the organization I'm leading. And they help us grow and help us get bigger and help us become more successful. And there's this cyclical thing that's constantly going on that's powerful.
Absolutely. And it's synergistic, and it's another everybody wins scenario, as we talked about earlier. So we are talking with Terry Smith, the author of the brand new book, The Hospitable Leader: Create Environments Where People and Dreams Flourish. We were just talking about that. So Terry, before we wrap up, I have a couple more questions for you. One of which is, when you're not doing all of the good work and doing all of the writing and doing everything else, what do you do for fun?
During the summer, I boat. On a regular basis, hopefully twice a week, I do Muay Thai. I have actually come to love the kneeing, elbowing, striking, kicking of Muay Thai. I find that it's exercise, but it's kind of become a hobby. And I'd say the next thing is I love to read. So I do a lot of reading.
Which leads us to nearly my last question. So what is it that you're reading now, or something, Terry, that you read recently that people might find interesting?
Right now, I typically have 5, 6, 7 books going. Right now, the book on my nightstand that I'm trying to finish is the new book on Da Vinci, the biography.
Yep.
I think is it Asimov who
No, it's Walter Isaacson.
Well, I'm sorry, Walter Isaacson, who of course also wrote the great book on Steve Jobs and also on Einstein. I'm
Yep.
finishing that. I just finished a book by Robert Andrews, or maybe it's Andrew Roberts, on Napoleon, a biography. I hope I didn't call Isaacson's book an autobiography. Obviously, it's a biography.
No, you didn't. It's all
okay.
Good.
What else am I reading right now? I'm reading a book by N.T. Wright about the revolutionary occurrence of the cross. He's a New Testament scholar. Some say the greatest New Testament scholar in the world today. That's something else I'm presently reading.
And everybody, we'll get all the links to those. If you go to the show notes at remarkablepodcast.com, we'll get you all the links to all that. Where can people, Terry, where can people learn more about you and your work and the book and all those things?
Well, of course, people can if they want, they can purchase the book wherever books are sold and all of that. But it's a lot more fun if somebody wants to go to to visit terryasmith.com, where we've opened a special page for your followers, for your listeners. And that's terryasmith.com/remarkable. And we're offering the audio book for 50% off if somebody visits that page. And that's something that we wanted to do for all of your listeners. And if someone wants a free preview of the book, they can find that there as well. Terry, that's TERRY, terryasmith.com/remarkable.
Hey, everybody, that's just one more reason why you should be listening every week, because good things happen to those who come and pay attention to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, excuse me. So now I have a question for all of you who have been listening and watching, and that is, now what? What are you going to do with this 30 minutes of awesome conversation? What action are you going to take? Because if you were we hope you were entertained. We hope you were inspired, perhaps, but mostly you need to take some action. And if you don't take some action, including going to terryasmith.com/remarkable, but seriously, what did you get from this? Is it something about the connection between your vision and the vision and dreams of your team members? Is it something in relationship to being more welcoming and more hospitable in one of the very number of ways we talked about, communication or others? And so I want to thank all of you for being here. But most of all, Terry, I want to thank you for joining us. We had to struggle through some technology, but we got there and it was worth it.
It was, hey, listen, it's just been wonderful for me to be with you today, Kevin. I appreciate it so much.
It was a pleasure. And so everybody, every week we're right here. Why wouldn't you just come on back for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast?